Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you can see, I have with me Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, someone who knows China very well. With the recent moves that the Chinese are making against Taiwan, what I wanted to ask General Sharma is what is the change China is going to make with its standoff or its issues that it has with India, which are ongoing? Sir, thank you so much for joining me and discussing this particular subject. It is Chinese have been making a lot of noise with regards military movement in the past some time. How do it's a time of change, if I may. Would you agree to that? Just to open the conversation.
Thank you for inviting me, Adi. It's a very interesting thought. Uh, Everybody's become a six-shooter. You see, Israelis are firing, and then there is a Ukraine war on, and now the Chinese are firing. So people have become trigger happy. It seems, the countries have become. There is a change paradigm worldwide.
Hmm.
So it's a cause of concern. The people have taken diplomacy to backseat. Uh, so these are serious concerns, all right. And yes, you're right. The What the Chinese did with Taiwanese, and of course, the ongoing exercises across in South China Sea, as they shifted across, or the Bohai Sea, are all causes of great amount of concern to large number of people. Uh, but I would put the what is happening on the line of actual control over the period of last 2 years and what's happening with Chinese and Taiwanese in separate baskets. They cannot be put together as to one singular issues because Taiwan is an ongoing issue with Chinese for a very long time. And it's kind of the importance of Taiwan's unification for China, and it cannot be understated. It is on the basis on which the entire CCP rests,
Hmm.
and any attempts by Taiwanese to declare independence or anything close to that will be not acceptable to the Chinese in any form. So then that's a very major issue, and it's a separate issue altogether. On line of actual control, we can discuss this, but there are seemingly different connotations of what's happened in 2 years and what's going to happen in what's happening today, what's going to happen in future. They're two separate issues. I think to combine them together and call it two front, etc., for the Chinese, I think that's been doing injustice to the whole issue.
So, so let's look at a military analysis. Now, the Chinese have focused quite a lot of force in terms of projection, in terms of actual mobilization towards the Taiwan region, the provinces Fujian and all that. We also see ongoing exercises, as you just mentioned, and as a matter of fact, with the latest congressional delegation that has gone there, the Chinese have now said that the exercises will be intensified to a certain extent. Uh, how do you see their aggressive posture overall as a military organization which is concerned, uh, not combining but looking at both these theaters separately, sir?
Okay, see, the fact of the matter is that the Taiwan is not a island to simply be plucked away. It requires intense amount of effort to do so. It
Mhm.
will require mobilization of large flotilla, which will have to come on the eastern seaboard of the China to launch it over the 130 to 150 kilometers distance across. It's the last amphibious kind of landing was carried out in Korean War in
John.
1953. Nobody's attempted this kind of. It's a very difficult operation. And about wars, as we have seen what's happened in Ukraine and Russia, wars have a life of their own. You just cannot guarantee what's going to happen tomorrow. So Taiwan may not be a simple operation to be carried out. Then there are, of course, Americans there. There are American bases in Okinawa. There is issues of Japan involved there. So it's not so simple proposition. So while it is easily said that there is the Chinese would much like to take over that island, it is not tomorrow. It can't happen so soon, because if it goes wrong and it goes messy, which is all the likelihoods of going messy there, so then there is intense amount of pressure that comes on the CCP.
Mhm.
As you are aware that there was an issue of nationalism in China once Nancy Pelosi's visit came through, and the people of Chinese were saying, yeah, why didn't you react? Why didn't we stop the aircraft from Nancy Pelosi landing there? So there is this nationalism which is now backfiring also, it seems. WeChat and, or Weibo, and all these people were writing intensely. So it's not so simple. And this is a year of the 20th Party Congress, where the president has to earn his spurs for the next 5 years. I think that this is more likely to be an intense military coercion which China relies on mostly, and cause all the kind of grief that they can carry out and tensions across the straits. But the war of capture of the main island of Taiwan is not near. It is still some distance away. The smaller islands is a separate issue. The islands of Kinmen, which is just off the Fujian coast, or Pengu Island, those islands, the island in the South China Sea, those are small islands, but then they are also matter. They are islets. Now 80, 90 of them all over the place. So the Chinese can occupy these islands if they wish to, but it won't give them that kind of advantage which capture of the main island of Taiwan would do so. So I personally think that it's not tomorrow, it is some years away, though it's a issue which rankles the Chinese intensely and they want to do so. Taking a step back on one side, see, in the course of what discussions have taken place and how the border has formulated itself in the 2 years, especially in the Ladakh region, instead of a line of actual control, it's become kind of belt of actual control. With the buffers being created, there is a gap in the excitation area between the Chinese forces and us. So there is a kind of, he's made a border more benign, and it is separation of forces on both sides. So it's not one line which we were contesting earlier. Now there is a belt of an area. Chinese have done intensive amount of work in 2 years in Tibet, especially in the areas, and Xinjiang, in the areas close to Ladakh and elsewhere. So it causes a lot of geostrategic pressure on India. But it doesn't mean that then Chinese are getting prepared for an onslaught. I think the tensions are bound to last on the line of actual control for a long time to come.
So I was hearing you, and I'd like to just digress for a minute with regards to the line of actual control. You spoke about these villages in one of the recent talks that you had given, and you mentioned that the Chinese have basically de facto formalized this particular line, especially in the east. With these villages forming up, it basically forms a borderline. Um, when you look at it, yes, it's an aggressive posture. It can create problems in terms of our defensives and a whole lot of things. But it also tells us that they are wanting to kind of finalize this entire thing. Would you agree with a notion like that?
So, what is Chinese aims in life? Firstly, one have to contemplate what is the Chinese strategy. Why does he want to do China what it wants to do? Whether it's on the ocean side, maritime side, or on the territorial front. Chinese is a strategic nation. They think strategically. There's nothing tactical about what they do, because everything is controlled by the CCP. PLA is the instrument of the Communist Party. Now, if you take what they did in last 2 years and what they're doing, this villages, business, etc., and the infrastructure being development, it's all has a strategic aim. Chinese are working assiduously to create an influence across the world. They want to become a global power. They have set their ambitions absolutely rightly, and they said they will become a global superpower in times to come. Now, which nation can aspire to become a global superpower whose own backyard, which is the Indian border, has got so much of problem with them? And it is mired into the tensions on the Indian border and is aspiring to have influence across 150, 160 nations across the world. So then there is a gap here. I would like to opine by saying that the Chinese wanted to put this border on the Indian side for some time at rest and make it benign. And to do so, they have done many actions. It's not villages alone. It's large series of actions. Firstly, it's created the belt there. It's also created the villages there. It's got infrastructure. A new road is coming up. The air infrastructure has improved tremendously. With the villages, there are 5G connections. There are proper the 624, 25 villages, whatever they are made. They're small. They are 5G. There are roads, tracks existing there. So he's kind of firming in the demography along the line of actual control and fixing it for a long time to come. So is he trying to fixate the borders? Not settle it. He's not settling the border. He's not demarcating the border, but also retaining the forces which he had brought in ex-air into these areas so that it keeps a pressure on India. And he does exercises all the time. He's doing exercises presently. So now, is he getting poised to now break out as we start on the next term of President Xi, break out of the first island chain and then venture across to the Indian Ocean, to the other areas, because he has now spent $900 billion in last 6, 7 years, 8 years over 150 odd countries. He has assets all over the world. 100 ports he owns. So he has to actually venture out to now reach out to the world to have the influence, put the border at rest and move out. I think that could be one of the options.
So one thing that has got a lot of Indians, for the lack of a better word, pissed off, and is that ship which is docking in Hambantota. I'd like to leave the whole discussion of Sri Lanka away from here, but my question to you in this particular, what I want to ask you is the crux point is that they've got a whole lot happening in Taiwan where they would need a lot of the naval power. They've got a lot of issues with India in the border. Why bring in another angle or another domain into this entire game, knowing very well that India is pretty much dominant in this particular region, and there would be a sense of friction that it will create. Is this picking up a tussle, or is this, as I think a lot of us would understand, is strategic messaging that the Chinese love to do, or the Chinese are doing all the time?
So, you know, 60% of his trade, 70% of his energy goes through Indian Ocean,
Yeah.
and he's totally dependent. If there is just no way, if he doesn't dominate the Indian Ocean in times to come, we are aware that he's got a major issue energy which has gone up, and also agricultural land. Look at the amount of agricultural land Chinese have purchased worldwide, even in America, 145, 145,000 acres in Missouri itself. So all this land that he's purchased is because he's got problem of arable land inside his own country. Everything largely has to move to Indian Ocean. So Indian Ocean becomes a prime concern for the Chinese. And Indian Ocean, unfortunately, is an ocean which has got constricted entrances from Malacca to Aden to, all the access point, Persian Gulf. There are choke points. He has about 4 or 5 ships of the Navy at all times in the Indian Ocean, which are reported off and on. Finally, till the time he ventures out and he has this capability to sustain his fleet across an Indian Ocean, he will not be a successful power in the worldwide arena as a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he has those spy ships. This is a spy ship. There is no denying the fact. It's probably wanting to see how missiles are fired or how satellites are fired. He is falling to getting into some kind of information across by using the port in Sri Lanka. But overall, larger effect is that he has to get long-range maritime aircraft to oversee his fleet out here. He has to make sure that there is a fleet logistics which has to be carried out through his mainland across the Malacca states or one of the Sunda states, etc., to come to Indian Ocean or make a circuitous route. So finally, he has to position himself. And also, it's while it's a maritime issue, it's also territorial issue, land. Finally, he requires bases from where he can sustain his armada, his people, his fleet across here. So that's what he's seeking. He's got something done in Myanmar. He's got something in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. He's got Hambantota. We know Gwadar will come up tomorrow. There are coasts being Djibouti, of course, one knows. He's also developing in Cambodia, Reem port, and also in Africa. So finally, he is venturing out. This is his time to reach next 5 years with time for him to reach out into the Indian Ocean and establish itself as a maritime power so that it can sustain. Because otherwise, that's a is actually sealed. His merchant fleet, largest merchant fleet in the world, has to go through this area which can be interdicted anytime. So I think he's venturing out. All this hydrographic service he does, and he's brought the ship across here, are all aimed at a long-term perspective of reaching out to Indian Ocean and Indian Ocean rim countries so that he can have a sustainable fleet into this region.
Hmm. Yeah, there is a lot of work that the Chinese need to do for having a sort of a, I won't say dominance, but just the sheer presence in this particular region to ensure that their trade kind of goes smoothly. So I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you a twisted question right now. If you look at the figures that the Chinese are putting out about their economy, their growth, their factory outputs, their COVID impact, and the Premier Li Keqiang has been very, very vocal about this particular thing. He's put out a 33-point improvement plan with regards to the Chinese economy. They themselves are now talking about the zero COVID needs to be kind of tweaked a little bit here and there. So there's what that tells you is there's some sort of a turmoil which is taking place within the country. Economically, we know that they are having a challenge. They are trying to raise back money from the market because we recently read that they've liquidated their US debt, which was at about 1.3 trillion at some time. Now it's come below 1 trillion. And this is something that was reported by the SCMP and Nikki Asia, I think about a week
Yeah.
or 2 days ago. Now, my question to you is that we've got an India standoff. You've got a huge military mobilization in the southeast part of your country. And you also have, for the lack of a better word, US constantly fingering you, which costs money at the end of it. With the Chinese economy being where it is, pressures within the country, how do you think they plan to actually go on with this? Because the BRI is also kind of taking a bit of a jerk right now. So there's pressures all around. How do you see them balancing this entire thing out?
You're so right to point this out. Uh, you see, there is a stress on the economy. It not only comes internally, which of course the policies of 2021, the common prosperity and the dual circulation and the policies that he brought across there, and the zero COVID policy, which itself has a great amount of effect across there. You were heard recently about a run in a bank.
Mhm.
At least there's sealed an entire amount of deposits in the bank. So there is a stress in the country. But the stress is globally also. There is a recession. The US economy has had two consecutive quarters with negative results, which actually rightly any other country would be called under recession. And there is pressure on the energy resources, the pressure on food, great amount of pressure on food and the cost of the food item. So there is a global. And Chinese are a manufacturing, export-oriented country. If there is lack of will among the consumers in the world to buy issues, then any country which is a manufacturing country and export oriented will feel the jerk,
Mhm.
because people now, the countries will not want to buy stuff from China. If they can't offtake it, then there is no use of manufacturing. So there is a global problem across in recession, and most countries are reeling from it. Second part is that though Chinese have invested about $950 billion into BRI, there are 42 odd countries which are under stress. We know about we know about Sri Lanka, but there are 42 countries which have got under debt stress who are not able to survive. See, Chinese interest rates are way higher than the interest rates of World Bank and IMF, and their durations are also smaller. So the stress is tremendous. So they have written off some loans of some countries, but then you just can't go about. They require this issue. So there is a global stress on finances as is existing today, and it is evident it will last for some time. Internally, Chinese have had their own problems of getting on to more and more communism. See, common prosperity and all is getting more and more red than they were red earlier. So
Mm.
there is a stress around here. And of course, there is an issue of a middle income trap. There are countries which are not able to break out. When you're rising up, You're not able to break out of the middle income trap, so you get stuck into, because the wages are rising, the manufacturing will fall. Other countries like Vietnam and, Cambodia, Bangladesh will start doing production. So you get stuck into a middle income trap. Chinese are into that cusp of a time when there is an economic stress. And but I know also, of course, they have at one time it was stated they have a $3 trillion debt, and one doesn't talk about the internal debt. The local governments have been prolific in spending. They have been just spending any amount of money, just lifting up money and spending it. Now, of course, their central bank has come on heavily across local government, saying that you just can't keep spending money like that.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, I think the Chinese have also immense amount of resources and bonds, say in United States, about $1 trillion plus of bonds in United States, which is their surplus that they have created in the trade between US and China. So there is resilience possible here, and I would personally venture to say that there is if they are under stress, they will be able to find some ways out of this mess that they are in a global mess, and partially their internal issues, which they will have to find ways out in times to come. They are the second largest economy in the world. They are the world's largest manufacturing hub. Uh, as If the war terminates, this war which is on in the Europe, well, they would start looking up in many forms. So actually, all depends on how this global stress is working out and what the kind of pressures is brought to bear on China.
Indeed, sir. So let's talk about India and China. Now, one thing that we've seen in the past 2 years is that relationship between both these countries has been brought down to strategic messaging. It's an arrow shot here and an arrow shot there, and it's basically a race for influence or a race for a. I won't call it one-upmanship because it's a little low term, but I hope you get my gist. What I'm wanting to kind of question is the factor that we had the Dalai Lama going up to Ladakh on an Indian Air Force helicopter. That was a message. And then, the ship obviously was declared before that. But this whole pressure that came back from China towards Sri Lanka to kind of ensure that the ship goes through, and then the Pakistani thing just appeared, seemed like a sort of a response. And leaving these, I would call them tactical issues aside, do you think this is what the India China relation would come down to? Basically, strategic messaging and trying to be one upmanship sort of a thing in the entire going into the future?
So Chinese are masters in cognitive warfare.
Yeah.
They believe in all creating a whole lot of narratives, and then of course they would also squeeze the good old partners Pakistan to do whatever Pakistan want to do. But Dalai Lama going to Ladakh is not new. Dalai Lama occasionally goes to Ladakh, so he spends a month there. There is a place Dalai Lama stays. So it is not that this is happening for the first time. It has happened earlier. To go to that particular monastery, Lingshan, it's very difficult to go by road with the age, Dalai Lama's age, and etc. And to providing a helicopter, I think is a benign and a very fine gesture to be carried out. That it will ride emotion into China, so okay, fine. Those are here, but this festival is on in various monasteries. The festival was finishing, this 10-day festival. It's an inter-religious kind of a issue which is being created. Dalai Lama visited a church. He visited a mosque in Leh, and he also flew down to this area where many congregations had taken place, where this festival was finishing, and Dalai Lama had to go and give benediction there. So if he had to go by helicopter, how does otherwise one you expect him to go on the Lama Yaru Zanskar road, which is tough, back-breaking, and uneven times? I think if they look pragmatically, I think what we did was a very benign and a fine gesture. Whether Chinese like it or don't like it, well, that's okay. Those things can continue. It doesn't matter so much. There is an issue which you are raising about strategic communication. Now, Chinese are masters in strategic communication. Look at what Global Times keep writing, and Jinhua and all the press keeps writing. People's Republic Day, People Daily, they keep writing trash. They are masters in creating a strategic communication which is adversarial in nature, and it causes anxiety. We have to also respond in kind. And I think that's the way to go, because if this world is on strategic communication, we have to get across our narrative warfare, our cognitive warfare also going in equal measure, and address the issues. If this is the kind of future, well, so be it. We fight the wars as they come up.
Well, a lot of people would say that uh, if you look at the history of China and you look at China-India history, 62, when there was a huge amount of stress, pardon me, within China, the Chinese launched a operation against India, and they've kind of found these gaps in the middle. Even 79, there was a lot of issues taking place during that time. They found a gap with Vietnam. They've been kind of uh, known to be aggressive when they have internal issues. The point that I'm asking about India is that with Taiwan, yes, he's aggressive, but he knows whatever said and done, that median line has barely been crossed. If I may, with the kind of rhetoric that the Chinese came up with, they barely crossed it. 5, 7, 10 aircraft here and there. It's not
Yeah.
something that one would drive home on with the kind of browbeating the Chinese had done. Uh, and of course, there's US also sitting there. And from the Chinese perspective, they look at India being alone in the Himalayas. Do you see that uh, anything building up, and is there something that India can expect coming forward, looking at the campaign season coming in as well, sir, in the east especially?
So are you referring to hostilities on the east? Is that the
Hostilities,
question?
standoffs, pressure.
Hmm. Okay, so these are interesting formulations, and uh, if you follow the infrastructure that the Chinese are building, the kind of force levels that he has brought about and sustained itself, and the kind infrastructure right coming up to the border, right up to say Dokala or Dokalam, as you're saying, or the east, and the G695 will start from Mazar, closer all along the line of actual control, the new road that he's building up across there, and the force level. Well, anybody will say that there is a cause of anxiety, and it is a pressure being built, and we have to be conscious of the fact. But having said that, is China, see, if you follow the history of warfare in Chinese, especially post-independence, post-1949, the 50-53 war with Korea, or 62 war with us, or 67 that we had a skirmish, and we had 79 with Vietnam, nowhere have the Chinese ever declared their casualties. How many people? Even the Great Leap,
Yeah.
they never declare it. You see, the Americans said the Chinese had 90,000 soldiers killed in South Korea, in Korea, in that war in Korea. But Chinese have not told us anything. In the Indian context, also 62 war, we came to know 700 some figure, which came up in 1994, subsequently through some researcher picking up somewhere else. And on Vietnam, the answers came up sometime in 2013-14,
Mhm.
where one of the journals mentioned something. So all not authoritative at all. Chinese government, what does a communist authoritarian government fear the most? I think they fear the public opinion the maximum, because it's the public opinion which causes them the great amount of grief. It's the contract, a social contract that the government, the Communist Party have with the people of the country. Get into a war, wars, as I said, are very messy affairs. And you try something, there will be attrition, there will be large amount of casualties. Uh, I wouldn't say that it will be greatly 50 million or odd killed, but there will be large amount of casualties on both sides. There will be body bags across there. How much can the Chinese withstand the next warfare? Next war is not going to be the wars of the past, at least on the territorial frontage, on the territorial borders. So are the Chinese ready to accept so many casualties that they come across there, whether it is in the northeast, in Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, or across on the central sector, or in Ladakh? I have my grave doubts they're prepared for all that. They would much like to do what they've done, coercion of South China Sea, keep hobbling up islands and keep building bases across them and say, okay, this is ours. And, that suits them the best. By coming in, capturing areas, then they could go through another Vietnam or go through another Korea. I don't think they are ready for that. So while the force level into the Tibetan plateau and the infrastructure being built must cause us concern, and also the modernity of warfare in which Chinese have taken large leap forward. The areas of cyber, areas of electromagnetic spectrum, the missiles, very large missile potent force, ballistic and cruise. So those areas of modern warfare in which Chinese have taken great strides forward. The Americans are saying in maybe in artificial intelligence and quantum, etc., the Chinese may be ahead of them as per the some of the American reports. We need to be conscious of the fact that there can be more and more military coercion, political and economic coercion carried out on India to keep us into check. Whether it translates finally and escalates across to a conventional war, well, that of course time will tell. There is no escalation dominance or escalation control to say, okay, it will not terminate into a war. Everything can happen. But I think we need to be prepared in the course of next 5 years, which is the third term of President Xi, when he has to prove himself that he has changed the constitution and become the president once again for 5 years. And he has to prove himself that, okay, this is a great decision taken by the CCP. We have to be prepared for military coercion and other types of coercion against us. How does it translate further? Time will tell.
So so to close this very interesting conversation, I think a lot of us in India would like to understand one little thing, that there is currently a anti-China fervor which is building up around the world with their actions. Let's start from COVID. I think that's a point of time where the whatever little soft power that the Chinese had started deteriorating. Uh, we went through a whole lot during the COVID times and stuff like that. But my question is, today we are in a position to probably take advantage of this anti-China fervor, which is especially in the Southeast Asia. There is a huge lot. One, do you see us taking advantage of that? Two, what more would you like us to do in terms of taking advantage and creating sort of a foothold in that particular region? And three, as far as strategic communication and messaging into, as we were talking before, what would you like to see happening?
Look, these are very interesting formulations. First thing is that we have to get our neighborhood sorted out. Our neighbors have been assiduously, the Chinese have been working on them. Nepal, Bhutan, maybe Myanmar, certainly, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan, of course, we know. So our neighbors, Chinese are working on tremendously. So we need to get our neighborhood policy all right, and bring about to fore as the problems that the Chinese are creating across onto our neighbors. Similarly, there are inimical nations who have very good relations, which are on the border, periphery of China, which we can work together to become a whole. I mean, create relationships with many countries. Vietnam is one, Japan, South Korea. So there is much we can do across those frontiers. But having said that, President Xi once said that I want China to be credible and lovable and respected country across the world. Now, it has got, relationships over, like I said, there are thousands and thousands of projects all over the world on BRI alone. Most of them, or many large number of them will not succeed, but there are a large number of them are already succeeding. He has the number of countries, over 100 countries owe billions of dollars across to the Chinese. From Solomon Islands to Latin America to Europe. Europe, there are 10 ports, 100 ports in 63 countries are built by the Chinese, and they literally own those ports. Mekong, I'm just saying example of Mekong. You see the river, China's upper riparian state, it's got 11 dams on the Mekong River, and it is very nearly close the waters for the downstream countries, the lower riparian countries. When they say they used to have floods for 3 to 4 months, they are not even floods in Mekong in the lower stream countries for 5 to 6 weeks, because the waters have been stopped. So the Chinese may not be having soft power, they may not get loved and respect, but they have influence across countries in the world, because Most of the projects, they have been Chinese people working there. They have something tangible to show on ground. And they have supported many of these countries when the World Bank, Bretton Woods institutions were not ready to support them because they had their own regulations. And they, of course, see, 1/10 of the agricultural land in Ukraine has been purchased by the Chinese. They had done major investments in Mariupol port here. There are more cars of Germany. 1/3 of the car of Germany are sold in China, which is the upmarket car, the Volkswagens and the Audis and the Mercedes and the BMWs. The kind of economic relationship that they have created in the world is unimaginable. And it is, if it is not colonization, well, it's a type of colonization that we've done. Without being loved, without being respected, without soft power. But influence, yes, a strong global influence. This is we as a country are respected across there. People do like India because of its virtues, by its values, by its culture, by its demeanor, the way we behave, the way we have over historically interacted with the world. So we are a light country. China would work to make sure that India does not reach its full potential in whichever way it is, because he knows India has the potential of rising higher. So whatever China can do, they will attempt to bring us down. We have to be mindful of the strategy behind China-India relations and what China wants to do with India. It wants to make India inward-looking. We need to break out of this shell. We have to reach out to the world. We don't have deep pockets like the Chinese do. It's not necessary also. But we have deep cultural relationships across with a very large number of countries. And, they look up to us from historically onwards. We have to catch that quality which Chinese can never bring. They can bring money on the table, but they can't bring relationships. There is where I think we need to succeed.
I think you've touched upon a very realistic aspect where the Chinese were kind of winning the battle of the checkbook, and now it's the battle of the hearts and minds that needs to be won. We see, although a lot of people would disagree with me with regards to Sri Lanka, but the leadership is different than the people. I think that's what you're trying to bring about, and we see a clear example of that in Afghanistan. We see a clear example of that in Sri Lanka. We see a clear example of that in Nepal as well. There is the
many of the projects that the Chinese have done are not cost-effective projects. Hanban Tota is not giving any money across to the Sri Lankans. They're making stadiums across into Africa, which are derelict, which can't be maintained also. So these countries start saying that, okay, we are hawked up into a net by debt in China. But the fact is that the kind of expenditure, many of them, was not a warranted expenditure. So we have relationships, many of these countries. We need to go back to relationship making.
Indeed, sir. Absolutely. So very, very, interesting points that you put out, because at the end of it, India has a challenge in front of us today where the game is getting heated up. And mind you, I think I'm right when I say it's a game, because it's not a battle as per se. It's going to be a game of chess where one player is going to move for domination and the other player is going to counter move for their own protection or for the domination in their particular field. Sir, thank you so much. I think, one crux that you've put out is that this is a tumultuous time, especially till the time that the election, selection, reappointment, or whatever you like to call it, happens of Chairman Xi Jinping. Things are going to be in a little bit of a turmoil. And as you said, India needs to be on the lookout for strategic messaging, strategic coercion, military push, or, for example, economic or any other sort of a move that is made by China, because that's what we see on the cards. With the Taiwan issue kind of staying hot, there is the deal that the Chinese temperatures are going to remain high for the coming some time. Thank you so much for joining me. As usual, it's a great pleasure talking to you, sir. Learning a lot always.
Thank you.
And till next time for another discussion on another subject. Jai Hind, sir.
Thank you, Adi. Bye bye.